Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How are you feeling? It's the last session of the day. Anyone sleepy? No? Are you excited to be here? Good. Okay, because I'm really excited to be here. Number one, it's my first break. I did a whole day on Monday, but it's my first breakout of the week, which is great. Number two, this technology has changed so dramatically in the last month that I'm really excited about that as well. It's really, they made a significant shift in the Azure technology. How did I get involved in it? I work with all sorts of different companies pretty much around the world these days, consulting for them. And one company I work with, it was about 2.5 years ago. He says, "John, I want you to get involved in Azure." And it was a bad Scottish accent, I know. But it was, he said, actually some of the companies I work with they like to bleed. They like to be right on the edge, on the bleeding edge of technology. And he was like, and I said, well, I know nothing about Azure, because I didn't even know how to pronounce it then. And I said to him, how can I help? And he said, well, you've helped us with all the other projects you've been doing. And he said, we'll learn it together. So that's how I originally got involved with Azure. And I've worked with this company on all sorts of things there, Active Directory, identity, and lots of other bits and pieces. Now, the first thing is pronunciation. How many of you can pronounce it correctly? Only 3 hands? This is terrible. Okay. Can you say, you're going on holiday? Can you say that? Try it. You're going on holiday. Perfect, right. Now say, as you are going on holiday. Come on. Hang on. Perfect. Now shorten the front bit. As you're going on holiday. That works. Okay, so what am I going to cover? First of all, I just want to briefly look at what the IT role is. And the IT role is enormous, of course, and the world wouldn't work without us IT pros. But what I want to do is just contrast this slide with the slide at the end, which repeats it. And having looked at all the different technologies, we can actually see what disappears and what increases. So we can look at that. I'm just going to do a very, very brief introduction to Azure fundamentals. What I want to do is look in particular at virtual machines, because they're very significant to us at the moment. And you've probably already had lots of discussion on virtual machines. So I've got one slide on that, and then we're going to go demo on that. I also want to look at how we connect on-premise and cloud. All right, and what is the significance of a virtual network in the cloud, and how do we connect it on-premise, and how do we actually gain access to servers? Do we use jump servers still? Because that's still a possibility. And then for completeness, I want to look at what an Azure application is. And just very briefly, just cover that. Because that's really not being talked about very much at this conference. And you will come across it. Developers will have developed an Azure app, and you'll need to know what to do with it. And I think you'll find over the years Azure apps will become very significant, because there are some fairly good advantages to using Azure apps. However, it's quite a leap to get there. It's a rewrite, basically, of the code. And then finally, I just want to briefly mention how we might manage identity in the cloud, and particularly want to look at the Azure Access Control Service to see what that has to offer. Now, interestingly enough, after anyone affected yesterday morning by the network? Pretty much everyone. What I decided this morning was I would actually pre-record the demos just in case the network failed. Well, the good news is the network's up. However, having started recording them, I thought, actually, I can actually start the creation of a VM and complete it, and just remove the time from the middle so you can see the whole story, particularly around creating the VPN gateway for the network. It's a 15-minute job, but it's nice to see the beginning and the end, rather than me sort of saying, here's one I cooked earlier. All right, so I'm going to do a combination of live and demos with chunks of time cut out of them. I will tell you where the time is cut out in case you go, wow, that's fast. All right, so just remember that. Okay, so what do we do today? Install server hardware. How many of you like doing that? Oh, 3 hands, 4 hands maybe. Yeah, some people I know are going to be installing lots of hardware very soon. Configuring the network. We all like doing the network, you know, especially when it gets to IPv6, it gets more exciting. But definitely that's a role. Installing the OS and then update, update, update forevermore. Okay? Well, the good news is if you deploy a Azure virtual machine, you'll still have to do that. Managing storage and backup. Okay? We'll find that Azure, we create storage in Azure, it replicates beautifully. All right? And what it'll do, it'll replicate 3 copies of your data in the data center. If you want to go across to another data center, you can do that as well. But if you go and delete something, guess what? The deletion replicates 3 times. So you're still going to have to think about how we back things up and manage that storage. Applying security, you'll probably want to lock your machines down differently, particularly around maybe how we actually gain access to our machines up in the cloud, because by default, build a machine in the cloud, it will have a public IP address. There'll be a firewall in between, but do we still keep it with a public IP address, or do we close that off completely? Managing certificates. Certificates, if you're going to deploy into the cloud, you're going to have to manage, obviously, communication certificates if you're going to be using HTTPS. But equally well, some of the management tools we need a certificate as a management certificate. So we need to deploy those up into the cloud. Deploying applications, and this is where we're not talking about virtual machines. This is where we're talking about deploying an Azure app. And then monitoring application OS health and performance. So that's what we do today, but I've given you a little bit of a flavor as to what you might be doing in Azure. So let's find out exactly. This one is absolutely key. And this is where a lot of us fall down, matching the business requirements by scaling to demand and being agile. All right? You go into a meeting and someone says, oh, yes, we need a clustered SQL database and we need 10 servers and actually, do you know what? We're going to sell Hoochie Coochie 2000 TechEd 2012 widgets. Have you bought any in the shop? They'll be online. But the demand is going to be so high that we'll probably have to scale for it. All right? So dealing with that and rapidly being able to scale is a really big challenge. And, you know, the sort of standard graphs you get, sort of managing demand, you launch this new e-commerce website. All right, or you launch some application that is available in the cloud. And then the next job is forecasting demand. So someone does a very careful bit of forecasting and draws a straight line up the middle. And then you say, OK, well, to do this, what we've got to do is we have got to put so much IT capacity in place to get the project to get kicked off. And that quite often is a stumbling block in the first place. And then what happens is sort of demand does something slightly different. And you see it ramping up rapidly, and you say, OK, let's increase capacity. But your forecast is wrong. And then you're under capacity. And then you go, wow, let's really push it up. And suddenly, demand doesn't increase anymore. So what you've got here, being under the capacity, is you've got potential business loss. And you lose face, you lose credibility, and you lose business. And that, you may well not flat line there, you may actually dip right down. And then, of course, here, you're totally wasted capacity. And remember, you're not just talking about hardware capacity, you're talking about power, cooling, you're also talking about licensing. And then, of course, there's the demand burst. This is a really difficult one to deal with. And a lot of organizations suffer this, particularly around sort of ticket sales. And this has sort of been classic in the UK with the Olympic ticket sales. You know, people are browsing the website thinking, oh, I'll go to this event, that event, that event. And then suddenly the ticket sales open and the demand goes through the sky. And normally what happens is somebody's designed the compute capacity to sit around about there. And so suddenly everyone's really fed up. It's in the press. And you're in trouble. And, of course, you end up with these CLMs. CLM? Career limiting moments. So, the key thing to remember about public cloud computing It's on-demand compute and storage capacity. It's internet-based, and why I've particularly put that bullet point there is if you've got something on-premise at the moment, it's probably protected by a nice perimeter, all right? And then you move it into the cloud. Just remember, out there are public IP addresses, and they could be connecting to you. So you've got to make sure, if you don't want a public presence, then just absolutely make sure that all your firewall endpoint settings are shut down. But on the other hand, you could be actually running a service, a web service within your organization, and then you suddenly think, well, wouldn't it be great? We could sell it to other people if we put it in the cloud. And you put it in the cloud, but none of it's been engineered, internet ready. So all of the software needs to go through a proper software development or security development lifecycle to make sure it's really robust and internet ready. You pay for what you use, is absolutely great. But also remember, it's delivered as a service. And I've seen quite a lot of people say, yeah, I don't like that. I'm going to tell them to change that. There's no way. All right? This is hosted for lots and lots and lots of people, and this is how they keep the cost down. So it's a service. It's delivered in a way. So you need to properly look at the SLAs. SLA, 99.95 uptime. Definition of downtime, 10 consecutive minutes of non-availability. And you go, what? So you mean you could be down for 10 minutes, up for 10 seconds, and down, and then up again, and you've got full availability? So just be very careful. Read those SLAs. And you're signing up to a service. You're not going to change what the service offers. You need to make sure it matches your requirements. The other thing, it's early days. It's early days for everyone. It's particularly early days for Azure in its preview state. Things will change. All right? So expect changes to happen and be ready to accommodate those. So if we look at the Azure platform, what you've got is you've got a management platform. Sitting on that, you've got compute, you've got storage, you've got SQL Azure. And we'll have to find out what the compute is, what the storage is, and SQL pretty much stands for itself. You've got a portal to manage it through. So you can do a lot of things directly through the UI, through the browser-based portal. You also have a complete set of APIs. So now you can use on-premise tools, so PowerShell, Windows Server admin tools, System Center, to actually get up there and work with what's sitting out in the Azure cloud. Web roles and worker roles, they've been around for a long time, okay? And that's pretty much how it was launched. It supported web roles and worker roles. And those were things for developers. Okay? So just a matter of interest, you may have changed your opinion since you came to TechEd this week. But how many of you, before you came to TechEd, thought Windows Azure was developers' platform? Okay, does that mean everybody else thought it was an IT pros platform? So how many of you thought it was just right for your providing services within your organization? Okay, so the developer platform won by about 20 votes to 3. But it has been perceived as that because you deploy applications up into the cloud. Those are the web roles and supported by worker roles. You've now got websites and you've now got virtual machines. Blobs, tables and queues, we need to find out what those are. We've got the Azure services, and part of those services is caching. Part of those services is the now badged as the Azure Active Directory, which currently just contains the access control service, but I think sometime in July you'll find there is an Active Directory which holds identity available. So July, August timeframe, that will be in preview. So you could actually have people up in the Azure Active Directory and use that to federate identity against different services. And then there's the combined on there. Did I put it on there? No, well, I've got network connectivity, which is the virtual network. And also there's the Azure Access Control Bus, which allows us to connect distributed services together, maybe on-premise distributed services, and connect them through the cloud, or connect from on-prem through the Azure Access Control Bus to another cloud provider. This is an interesting one. So Windows Azure, as I say, is an extension of your IT environment. That's what you've got to think of it. The problem is, and the anomaly is, that developers can go straight to it. And while they were developing worker roles and web roles, they probably completely short-circuited the IT department and just went straight into Azure and deployed. The thing is that if you had an on-premise server which was running an application, would you allow your developers to deploy into production? Anyone do that? You'd take control of it, wouldn't you? And it would be, very careful procedure to actually do that deployment. And what's happened is, because Azure was really sort of sold to the developers, they've gone and deployed up there, and what we need to do is take control back. So there's the take control back of Azure March going on later this month. Right, that there is the old portal. And this week, you've probably not seen that. There is the squeaky clean new portal. Right? And this is the preview portal, which if you've seen any demos of Azure, you've probably seen this week. At the moment, you need to use a combination of both. All right? There are certain things you can't do in the new portal. So how do we start? Well, we start with a subscription, and the best way of starting with a subscription is either just sign up to the preview. If you've got MSDN, how many of you have MSDN? Okay, so that's probably a third of the audience. There's a really good Azure, amount of Azure compute that you can get with the MSDN subscription. And there's various ways of getting different sort of access to Azure. So check out what's available. So what I want to do is start with taking you for a trip around the Windows Azure portal, and we'll start off here. Right, let's just switch over. So this is my trusty Windows Server 2012 box, and what I'm going here is you've got your free trial, you've got your portal. So here I'm logging in with a live ID, and this will give me access to the portal itself. And at the moment, I'm in the old portal. No problem. It's very, very easy to switch. You just go visit the preview portal. I will be coming back to this one because the access control service is handled through the old portal. So we're now in the preview portal, and I've got various things deployed, which we'll be looking at some of them. And what we can see is that down the left-hand side, you've got the option of creating websites, virtual machines, cloud services, whatever they are, and I will come back to that, SQL, storage, and networks. Just at the moment, because I think it's fairly obvious what a website is, I'm just going to show you the creation of a website. We can create a completely empty website, and there's a very useful free download, which is the Web Matrix, which will allow you to create content, or you can go up and create one from a template. There's a number of templates up there at the moment. I expect to see an awful lot more. And if we just scroll down the bottom of this lot, there's WordPress. So I can go and create a WordPress site. Now, I need to specify a URL, and what it's going to do is going to validate it. Well, somebody's already taken TechEd blog. So I've noticed it went green, just TechEd. So I'm going to choose that. Now notice it's teched.azurewebsites.net. You need to CNAME it if you want to create your own namespace for it. It will always be going there. So you CNAME. If you're publishing with HTTPS, you CNAME that and just make sure you get your certificates right. I'm creating a MySQL database, and the other important thing you need to choose is where you're going to create this thing. So I've chosen North Europe here. And then there's the MySQL database itself. It's already created a name for it. And then there's the region. And I think it would be a little bit silly if you had your front end in North Europe and your database in East United States. So it is important to keep these things together, and what you can do is you can create, there's a number of ways of doing it. One of them is affinity groups, which I will cover shortly. So I'm going to stick with North Europe here, and I need to agree the legal terms. Oops. Okay, so click on that. And this is the joy of being able to cut out a whole lot of time. This would take about 10 minutes. I now have a website actually in the cloud, and so it wasn't just amazingly fast. I did cut about 10 minutes time out of that. So what we've got is the ability to monitor this thing in terms of file storage, CPU time, etc., memory usage. There's my URL, and if I go to that URL, and if you're familiar with WordPress at all, you need to, having got the website there, you need to configure WordPress itself in thing. So the WordPress website's there, it just now needs configuring to be WordPress, and you choose all your options. And obviously I'm not going to go through that. So we'll close that off. And if we just go up here, I can monitor. So I've got sort of monitoring of data in, data out, HTTP server errors. If I go to configure, I'm running on the v4 .NET Framework version, PHP 5.3, and I can also turn on diagnostics and different levels of detail of diagnostics. I've got my connection string there for the MySQL database as well. If we go to scale, at this point, it's running as a shared hosted website, okay? And you get a certain number of those for free. If you suddenly discover that your blog is amazingly popular, you can actually put in its own virtual machine. So you can actually reserve for it, so it becomes reserved. You can change the number of instances it's running, and you can also change the instance size. Both of the instances and the instance size I will talk more about later. So it's running at the moment, it's single core, it's got 1.75 megabytes of memory, and it's classified as small. But again, I will cover that very shortly. So that's that. If we go back from websites, I'm going to look at virtual machines, cloud services, etc. in a minute. I just want to show you the creation of a SQL database, which is really simple and extremely fast. And it is fast, actually, even though I've cut a little bit of time out of that. So I'm choosing a new SQL server. I need a login name, which is my SQL admin, and password to go with that. And then, of course, I choose where to place this thing. So again, you can choose. So the good thing about it is if you've got a market in the Far East, you'll be able to place services out into the Far East. So that's the SQL. I probably only cut about 4 minutes out of that before it was up and running and available, and that just shows you the connection strings. So just as a sort of quick intro to that, you can see that you can actually move very rapidly in terms of creating websites, getting SQL up there, and we can do exactly the same with our virtual machines as well. And what we need to do is to actually, we need to look and understand what they are. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about cloud services, because this is what it really started with in the first place. So the idea and the concept was you would create a web role, and the web role would be like your IIS server, your front end. So that's what would interface with the client. It would be running a web server on that. You would create a single instance. However, if you wanted to, you could automatically scale it up. So if your demand went up, you just scale up the instances. Load balancing, you don't have to think about at all. It all happens automatically. It's also running on the application platform. So updates, all that stuff, you don't care about at all. It all happens for you. Now, you can scale that up and down. So you scale up for when you know there's going to be a peak, when your ticket sales open, and then you scale down when necessary. And you can then have worker roles, and worker roles are really compute engines, right? I've shown the database attached to the worker role in this particular slide, but it could equally well be attached to the web front end, and you wouldn't even need the worker roles necessarily. But they're there really as compute modules. Again, you scale them up, you scale them down. And then to communicate between these two guys, what you've got is you've got these things called queues and tables. And do you remember I mentioned at the beginning storage was blobs, queues and tables, and SQL, but that was the thing. So the idea here is that the web role can put a message in the queue, and all the worker roles are hanging on that queue, and they just take it out of the queue, one after the other. Okay? And then in terms of the results go into a table. All right? So with the results go back so that the front end can pick it up. So that's the sort of basic concept behind it. You create these things. They have to be specifically designed for Azure platform. Right? So you need a development platform that will have support the Azure SDK, and then they get deployed. And we'll come back to how they get deployed later. If you want a 99.95 SLA, then you need at least 2 instances. So if I was building this thing with 2 worker roles, 2 web roles, I would need, sorry, if I was building it with web roles and worker roles, I would need 2 of each to get my 99.95. Microsoft over the last year have achieved rather better than that, but that is the SLA that they offer. And as I say, automatically just add, remove instances on demand. And you could automate the whole process. So you could provide instrumentation, monitor what's going on, and you could automatically scale up. Or if you've got the ticket sales scenario, you scale up the day before and make sure you're ready. And then as soon as ticket sales open, you've got all this capacity available to you. And then as soon as the ticket sales start to drop off, because you're running out of tickets, you can start stepping down the instances. You don't have to bring them all up and all down at the same time. So we've mentioned instance sizes, and you can get extra small, small, medium, large, or extra large. And you've got the sort of CPU in there. So extra large is 8 core, 14 gigs of memory, and you've got instance storage, and you've got, in terms of I/O performance across the network, it gives you high performance there. You choose. Be very, very careful, though, if you get a free subscription, right? Because your MSDN Azure subscription, depending on which level you are, may give you extra small, or it may give you small. All right? So if you think, oh, I know what I'll do, I'll save some money, I'll go extra small. No. You'll get in your subscription, it says you can have small. If you go extra small, you'll be charged for it. All right? The other thing, be very careful about, even if you say it's not running, an instance takes up a virtual machine. So once you've deployed it up there, all right, it's taking up a VM, even if you shut it down, and therefore you are charged. All right? And don't do what I did. I did a really complex demo at a conference, and I had lots of worker roles, lots of web roles, lots of VMs, and I forgot about it. And my credit card didn't forget about it the next month. So just be very careful of leaving things up there when you're doing your testing. For instance, my subscription gives me 1,500 hours of small, all right? And that means I can leave 2 instances up permanently. So that's a possibility, but I tend to have much more, many more instances while we're trying stuff out. And remember, SLA requires at least 2. Now, your service is located at certain areas of the world, right? Obviously, it's located in a data center, but we're not meant to know where any of the data centers are. So you choose Northern Europe, you choose Western Europe, you choose Eastern Europe, you choose US. Right? And the key is I was expecting a... okay, so I'm going to have to ad-lib that. I was expecting another slide to come up on top. The key is what you can do is you can create an affinity group. And what the affinity group does is it guarantees that if you use the same affinity group for two different services, they will be in the same data center, if at all possible. All right? Obviously, if data center capacity is completely run out or something silly like that, they'll spin it up at a close data center. But affinity group tries to anchor these two guys together, or multiple, so you can put things into an affinity group. So you define an affinity group. I could define an affinity group for, you know, I could call it my favorite location in Europe. All right? And then I would choose Western Europe. And then there might be 5 data centers in Western Europe, but what it will do by using my affinity group, it will try and put all the services in the same data center. In terms of storage, you can allocate local storage, and you can have local storage, and you do it on a per instance basis. All web roles and worker roles are stateless. So if one of these guys needs to be recycled, right, that data potentially disappears. So any data you store locally, remember it is a virtual machine that you're running this instance in. And on the virtual machine there is a drive which is effectively a caching drive. Right? If the thing gets recycled because of a failure, then the data in that can disappear. Right? So what we have to do is we have to have persistent storage, and persistent storage is managed through blobs, tables, queues, and SQL Azure. Okay, so a blob you can put absolutely anything you like in. So all your VHDs are going to be in blobs. Right? So if you create when you install a virtual machine, what you'll have is an operating system VHD, and then you can create data VHDs. There's a difference between operating system VHDs and data VHDs. Operating system VHDs do effectively write caching. All right? Whereas data VHDs don't. Now, depending on what you're running, you have to be very careful. So you may, for instance, find on a SQL server that you don't want caching on either. All right? So, but by default, when you install the OS, it will be in a caching drive. All right? So you can disable that, bit of PowerShell. So you can effectively turn off write caching, if you want to think of it in those terms. If you deploy Active Directory up into the cloud, you've got to make sure that the DIT, the actual directory itself, is on a data drive that is not caching. It's very, very important. But by default, OS goes into a cache drive, data drives, and non-caching. The other thing is, if you deploy a VHD up into the cloud, it becomes fixed in size, so it becomes a fixed disk. So if you've got a dynamic disk, you know, if you use the PowerShell tool for actually deploying it, what it will do is it will turn your dynamic disk into a fixed disk. In terms of storage access, every piece of storage has a URL associated with it, and you can access it using standard REST APIs. So you can do your standard posts, gets, puts, and deletes. And therefore, you can actually access Azure storage from absolutely anywhere. And there's some very good third-party tools. One I like is Azure Storage Explorer. The other one, I'll show you this, but I'll also show you Cloud Explorer. So if you just go up on the web and do a search for Azure Storage Explorer, you'll find you can download it. You can actually, this is on Codeplex, so you can actually get the code for it as well. Whereas the Cloud Explorer is clumsy leaf software, but you can download it. It's free to use. And I'll show you both of those in operation in a moment. Okay, so what I want to do now is create a storage account, and then I'm going to access that storage account from my on-prem machine. Okay, so let's switch over. So we're going to go back to now to the main menu, storage up here. And under storage, what we can do is, well, we don't actually need to be in storage to go new. And you can do a quick create. You need a URL for it, and it will be something you choose, dot, and the star you'll see in the moment. The star up here is going to be either blob storage, it's going to be queue storage, or table storage. When you create a storage account, it gives you access to the 3 different types of storage. This has to be totally unique. So storage 101 is your URL, it's validated, no one else has actually used it. You then got this regional/affinity group, and this one with the strange GUID is, I assume it's an artifact from creating it originally in the old portal. All right, so that's where that came from. So I can choose where my storage is going to be. Obviously, affinity groups are good because if I created things in affinity groups, I could lump them all together. Well, we just choose Northern Europe. Now, this is an interesting one. You remember I said in your data center, your storage is replicated 3 times so that if one's lost, right, you can still keep going. If you lose another one, you can still keep going. If the data center gets flattened, your data's gone. Right? But what you can do now is you can choose to enable geo-replication. Right? And you can't actually choose yourself, but you should be able to, I say should because all of this is fairly new, you should actually be able to contact through email or phone call and say, okay, I need to know where the geo data center is, because if you're worried about it going out of region, right? So a lot of the data centers the geo data center is close by, right? But if you're worried about your data privacy and moving it out of country and things like that, you just need to absolutely confirm if you go for geo replication where it's going to be replicated to. But now what you've got is 3 sets of data here and 3 sets of data in a different data center. So I don't want to be charged for that, so I'm going to turn that off. And then you get this little thing here saying, enabling geo-replication later can have a pricing impact. All right, so I'm going to leave that off. So this is creating the account. This is probably something like 6 to 8 minutes to create it. And again, how much storage you get is down to your subscription level. And you're obviously charged by, in a subscription level, you get a certain amount of free storage, and then you pay for more. Okay, so there it is. It's there. It's online. So Storage 101 is now online in Northern Europe. If we have a look at it, what we can see down here, do you remember I said it says Storage 101? Do you remember it said dot star dot? So you've got blob, table, and queue storage that's available to you. So that's the 3 different types of storage. And what we can do is if we go to configure, here you can change the geo-replication. You can monitor your blobs, tables, and queues, and you've also got logging on those blobs, tables, and queues as well. So that can be enabled. And the logging and the monitoring is all new to the new preview portal. Okay, so let's use Cloud Explorer. And I'm going to create an account in Cloud Explorer. So you're going to get a new Windows Azure account. This one, be careful. The account name, it sort of looks like you just type in a name. It has to match the name that you just used. So I called it in here, Storage 101 in here, so I'm going to have to match that. I now need to get the secret key, which will allow me to access this storage. So I need to go back to the actual storage up here and manage keys. So I now grab I've got 2 access keys. I'm going to grab my primary access key. Don't bother remembering it because I'll regenerate it after the session. So, but that would allow basically anyone to access, right? So there's no further security. If I've got that key, I can access it, right? So I'm going to access it through SSL or TLS, so that's done. And then if I go to my storage, expanding that, what we should find is we've got nothing in it. I'd be very surprised if there was something in it. And this is where you can drop your storage. This is, by the way, this is blob storage it's looking at here with Cloud Explorer. So I'm just creating a container here. And there's my test container. And if I just go and find something on here on the C drive, just grab this guy. Just pop that in there. Right, there's now sitting up in the cloud, all right? And just to prove it, let's have a look first of all at the policies on this storage. So the policy default is private, but I can change that. So I can make it that for full public read access. Now if I actually go and pick up, you know, it's all accessible through a URL. So if I go and pick up that URL, right, and drop that into a browser, what we should find is we've gained access to it. It wasn't a very exciting file. I should have had something a bit more exciting up there. But it shows you that you can gain access to it. So in public storage, and you can control, obviously, you could have public blob storage folders. You probably do not want public queues and tables. So you'd have your public blob storage. And another feature of Azure, again, you can't do it through the new portal, is you can do caching. So you can actually cache content around the world so that when somebody comes to your website, if they need to download something, they can go from one of the cache points rather than having to go all the way back to where your actual web service is hosted. So it gives you another code. So that's what we need to see is how we actually use the sort of how we use we can see, I think, obviously how we use blob storage, but what about tables and queues, and see how they fit in. But we know they're for communicating between front ends and back ends. Okay, so good time to ask any questions so far, rather than waiting till we get to the end. Yes.
Small subscription. How much storage do you get?
Oh, there's a question here on small subscription. How much storage do you get? You need to look if you've got MSDN, right? You will either have a premium or an ultimate. Now, if you've had MSDN for a while, it's worth checking to see if you've been automatically upgraded for Ultimate, because you get rather more. So if you've had an MSDN subscription, and I don't know whether you had to have signed up for an Azure subscription prior to, it was a date about 2 months ago, but, or maybe actually a bit more than that. But they basically bumped up people to using the Ultimate, which gives you more. And the best thing is just to go up on the website. I would hate to tell you a value. I think I get 128 gigs in my subscription, but don't quote me on that. And if I'm wrong, I'm going to be charged again at the end of next month. Right. But you can. There's quite a good. All of the subscriptions, etc., are. Let me just. Hang on. Let me just. I wanted to find my Azure. Yeah. So there is. Switch back. So you've got a pricing calculator up here. So you can, in terms of SQL, bandwidth, virtual machines, and then there's members offers. So you can get, if you go to members offers and you see what you get. So here you are, using Visual Studio and MSN, you get up to $3,700 worth of annual Azure. All right, so I don't know how, I'm not going to drill in for, here we go. So professional, you get 375 hours of small instance. And let's have a look. Can we see the storage somewhere down here? Storage. Oh, you only get, oh, well, I'm totally wrong. I thought it was 128 gigs. So I'm going to obviously be charged lots of money. So you do have to be careful with your subscription if you're just looking at it to evaluate it and things, because Microsoft will take your credit card and they will happily charge it. There was an interesting thing, actually. So somebody says, why doesn't the Azure platform automatically figure out whether you actually need more compute instances? And I thought that would be very interesting, wouldn't it? Suddenly your provider's increasing your instances and the charges against your account. So maybe it's something you need to monitor. There's lots of third-party tools for actually doing it and increasing the compute power. Okay, so next job, Windows Azure Virtual Machines. They are VMs as we know and we love. Now, somebody might say, you might have heard of VMs prior to this latest release. They were non-persistent. And they were purely put there that if you had the idea of a web role, worker role, it goes on a virtual machine, but it needs to install very quickly. All right? Web roles, worker roles are effectively dynamic libraries. You know, if you install an application, it normally worms its way into the operating system, registry settings, and all the rest of it. So web roles, worker roles don't do that. They just sort of plonk themselves on the VM and off it goes. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but, you know, that gives you an idea. So they had this concept of non-persistent VMs where you've got a legacy application that takes a long install time. But if you recycle the VM, you just lost all the data on it. Right? So now these are proper persistent VMs. Right? And you can also, there's a template that you can choose from. It's fairly limited at the moment, but you can go and I'll have a Server 2008 R2 Service Pack 1 template, or I will use a Server 2012 template. And what we'd expect to see very shortly is templates with SharePoint already on them, and so you don't even have, you want a SharePoint? Away you go. Just there's a VM with SharePoint. And in fact, the nice thing about SharePoint is that all your SharePoint servers are the same. All right? So you can actually have all the servers the same, and then you say, these are web front ends, and you don't run the services on those, and then you put the services on the back-end servers. So it's a very nice, actually a very nice application to deploy into this environment. You can bring your own, so you can create a VM on-premise, right, in your Hyper-V. At the moment, Hyper-V is the only one that's supported. I'm not sure what the, whether you'll be able to create it in VMware and upload it. I have no idea what's happening in that space. And then 99.9% SLA with single instance, and you think, how on earth do they do that? Well, all it is, really, it's a virtual machine running with a VHD attached. Right? VHD is replicated 3 times at the data center. Virtual machine goes down, you just attach it to another one, off it goes again. So you've got not a bad SLA on a single instance. And you can connect it with the Windows Azure Virtual Network. So what does the virtual network look like? So up here, you create a network in the cloud. You bring your own IP address ranges to it. Right? So you've got your own IP ranges up there. And then if you can leave it at that. So you could just have a virtual network. Right? You could have then, you've got to get to it, so you'll need a public IP on one box. But what you could say is this box is the jump server. And this is the only one that has a public IP, and I'll jump in through that and go to all my other virtual machines. What you do with just a bunch of virtual machines with no access to, I have no idea. But it's a possibility. Or if you were doing SharePoint, for instance, you could have a jump server that takes you into the SharePoint machines, and then you could use the load-balanced web front ends with a public HTTPS connection. or an HTTP connection. So that's a possibility. But if you want to, you can create a gateway which will take you down from the cloud onto on-premise. All right, and that's a VPN gateway that takes you right across. It's supporting IPv4 routing. It doesn't support IPv6 today. All right, and we just, again, have to watch the space on that. So what I actually want to do is go and create first of all, a virtual network. And this is I suddenly realized when I was saving myself the embarrassment of no network interface, maybe, that actually I could show you the complete gateway creation, because, as I say, that's a 15-minute job. So we'll go through that complete creation, and then having created it, we'll put a virtual machine on it and review that. So let's switch over. So the first thing we do is we go up here and we go into networks. I have one network at the moment, but we're going to create a completely brand new network. You give it a name. You choose where it wants to be hosted. So I'm going to go in North Europe in this particular case. And then next on there, you give it your address space. So what we'll do is we'll say this is 10.40.0.0 and /16 as the network prefix. And you can create multiple networks. I'm going to not bother with creating subnets, but if you wanted to subnet it, you could subnet it as well. Next on there, and I've done something silly. So sorry about that. What happened there? So unfortunately, I wanted to do it this way, so we couldn't. So I'm I'll start that again. So as I say, just any old name in here, and then the affinity groups, you can pre-create those, and that one with, as I said, with the GUID, I actually created in the original portal. So. And this, you bring your own network space entirely. So you don't have to worry about any network space Microsoft will give you. It's whatever you want to use. And you, as I say, you can create subnets, but I'm not going to bother. Okay, so now you think, why do we need a DNS server and specify a DNS server address? What it's going to do for you is automatically going to do DHCP on that network. So this is the DNS server for that network. Okay. If you leave it blank, what it will do is it will point you at an Azure DNS server, which will allow you to resolve internet DNS. All right. So if you're starting this thing off, you just leave it blank. All right. And then if you deploy a domain controller, you can later on come and fill it in with the correct domain controller address if your domain controller is going to be DNS. And then you would use on your domain controller, you would set up a forwarder to the actual Azure DNS, so you could still resolve outside if that's what you wanted to do. So I'm going to leave that blank, and then this creates a network, right? But no connectivity to the outside world. If I choose this option up here, what I do is say what subnet I want the gateway on. Well, I've only got one, so it's going to be that one. And then what we do is we say, in terms of, do I want to create a local network? Because what we've got is we've got Net 101 up here with the subnets I defined for it. And then this guy, if we create a gateway, needs to route down to on-premise. So that's our on-premise network. So what we need to do is create a local network here to define, so it can set up its appropriate routing rules to route out down to on-premise. So we'll say create new local network, and then what we'll do is we will go on from there, and so I need to give it a name. So I'm just going to call it my corp net, and we'll just call it work in there. Okay, I need an address space for that, so we'll do that first. Okay, so what I've said is 10.100 is down here, all right? Net 101 is up here, and what we need to do the gateway creation on Azure is to actually know the public IP address of this guy. So that's what we specify in here. So this is the VPN, our VPN IP address. That'll do. I have no idea whose address that is, so don't look it up. Okay, so that is now creating the network. And having created the network, the next job will be to create. So that's created the network up in Azure, so that's our virtual network. The next job is to create the gateway. So if we select this now, and we can go on here, create gateway. And as I say, this is the nice thing about this, I can cut out about a 15-minute time span, which is what it takes to create the gateway. So that has created the gateway. That is the public IP address. So that's what I need to, when I configure my VPN here, I now know the public IP of this end of it. But because there's some fairly complex rules, what you can do is you can actually download, and again expect this to change dramatically in terms of vendor support and everything else. So I can actually download configuration files for Cisco at the moment, Juniper, but over the next few months I would expect that to change. And you just open it up, and there is your configuration file for your device at your end. All right, so it actually takes away an awful lot of troubleshooting and trying to find out what's going on and fixing it. Okay, that's the network. Next job, virtual machine. So we go to virtual machine. I've actually got 3 VMs. I'm going to go for a new one. And I can do a quick create, or I can choose from the template. That's the template set at the moment. So you've got Server 2012, you've got SUSE Linux and Ubuntu, and you've actually also got SQL Server already pre-installed. And as I say, very soon I would expect to see SharePoint there and things like that. So we choose in here a virtual machine name. So I'm just calling it SP4, just nice and easy. You set in a new password. You confirm the password. You choose your size. So I'm just going for small. I need a DNS name for this guy. So I'm going to choose that. Notice it's connected to CorpNet. So that's my internal network within Azure. I need a storage account. I'm just going to use that one. And I need a suitable DNS name for here. So I'm just using XTS SP4. This option up here, connect to an existing virtual machine, will effectively connect it to a virtual machine with the same IP as another one. All right? And why do we want to do that? Because we want to load balance. So it now becomes a load balancing VIP that we can load balance across multiple. So if you were deploying SharePoint, the SharePoint web front ends, you would use this option so you could then load balance across the WFEs as the front end servers. But I'm just going to leave that as is. So I'm next on there. And availability sets. What an availability set is if you create a number of machines in an availability set, it will actually say that, well, for the moment, let me just say default fault domains, and let me say update domains, and I come back to that. If you're in availability set, you will be in a different fault domain and a different update domain. But I'll explain that shortly. Okay, so next on there, and this is creating our VM. So again, this would probably be a 10 or 12 minute job to actually create this. So that's up there now, and if we look at it, we can do things like we've got a dashboard which tells us the number of cores, etc. Disks, it's just got the one disk at the moment, which is the operating system disk. Endpoints is, we've got an endpoint which is our public address, and this is how it connects through to us. So what we're saying is if we come in on TCP on port 51414, it will allow through a mapping through to 3389. So that gives me the remote desktop access to it. If I don't want it, I just remove it. If I want to add an additional endpoint, I can do that. So just add endpoint, and we can choose a name for the endpoint, the protocol, the public port, and the private port. All right? Or as I say, if you don't want endpoints, you can disable them, and you can come through your virtual network from your CorpNet. You can change the core size, and we can also set the availability set in here. So now, if we go back to our virtual machines, what would be interesting is I want a data disk. So attach an empty disk. We'll give it a size. We'll make it 1 GB in size, just so it's quick. So it's now attaching that data disk, and having attached it, what we'll do is we'll actually go now and use a remote desktop to that server. So we select it, do connect, and now we're connecting up on remote desktop. And we'll supply the administrative password in there. And very soon we are on a Server 2008 R2 data center box in exactly the same way as you would be on any on-premise server using remote desktop. So if I, well actually we just go straight from here. If I go to storage, just to show you, just to complete that little story, and go to disk management in here, what we should find down here is we have a 1 gig disk, and what we can do is we can actually format that up. And, you know, in terms of adding roles and all the other bits and pieces, installing software, it's absolutely identical to working with your on-prem machine. The other thing is it's a little bit of a mindset difference, but if you're deciding to experiment with this, and you do have an MSDN subscription, what you can do is you can start a virtual machine up in the sky and then go from it to MSDN, and you'll get a phenomenal download speed. All right? So actually you can, and I've done this with sample VHDs. What I've done is I've actually connected, I've effectively built a jump server in the sky for jumping up to where the VHDs are, download them onto this, and then I upload them to Azure into blob storage from Azure. And that's phenomenally fast. And so just think about how you could do that and work with that if once you start experimenting with this. Okay, I sort of come back to this. Web roles, worker roles, they are built by developers for the Azure platform. And what they'll give you is a couple of package files, one which is rather bigger, all right, and the top one contains all the binaries. It will actually hold the instance size, but not the number of instances in it. And the bottom one is the actual service configuration file. All right? You deploy those up into the portal. But the guys can also go directly from Visual Studio and deploy them up into the portal if you set them up with management certificates. All right? So they've got they can completely jump you. So what you do is you let them do that in their development area, but you have two different subscriptions to Azure. One is your development area subscription, and one is your production. And when it's production time, you take control of these and do the deployment. Update fault domains, mentioned those before. There is this concept of an update domain and a fault domain. Update domains are for when software changes have to be made. All right, so if a software change was made to remember now if we're deploying these things, it's a whole application platform stack. So if Microsoft needed to upgrade it, what they do is they would make sure that you will be distributed across 2 update domains. So they'll update this one, so you'll lose an instance during that upgrade, and then they will update this one. So it means your service, although it may be, in terms of performance, you might lose a bit of performance on it, you don't lose functionality. Yes, question?
Does the update also applies for the virtual machine? Does Microsoft put patches and not fixes?
No, so the question was, do the updates also apply to virtual machine? The answer to that is no, unfortunately. Then you will actually look after your virtual machine updates yourself, right? So, but what it does do is there's this other concept, that's the update domains. There's the concept of fault domains. Remember the availability set? It distributes your VMs across fault domains. So if they lost a network switch, basically a fault domain is a rack. So if they lose a rack, you can still keep functioning. Question? If they update their template library. Yep. So the question is, will they update the templates? And I'm sure they will, but they're used when you create the virtual machine instance in the first place. Yeah. So if you wanted to move up to the next flavor of virtual machine, you could either update your own VM, or you could say, I'll start again. You've also got this concept of staging and production, so you can actually move between staging and production itself. And so really all it is a VIP swap. So you could have 2 areas up there, one which you call staging, one which you call production. So you could have production running with a production URL, and you can test things out in staging, and then you simply do a VIP swap, and it swaps you between the 2 areas. So let's just do a quick look at this. And so in terms of deploying and running the apps, I've actually got, I'm not going to actually deploy an app itself. What I've got is one running. It's called XTS1. And if we have a look at that, what we'll see is actually there's a couple of web roles and a couple of worker roles up there. And I'm using 2 instances of each, so I've actually got 4 cores running. So we can see the 4 cores there as actually the running. So what I'm going to do is actually, first of all, this is running in staging. Let's just have a look at the options. So we've got the capability of monitoring. We can configure this guy. So what we can do is change the monitoring level. We've also got the endpoints we can adjust. We've got the operating system, base operating system. You can actually go from 2008 to 2008 R2. If you want, you just increase your instance sizes. So I've got 20 cores on this particular subscription. So let's see, I can only, maximum is up to 20 cores. There's the 4 instances actually running. And on the very last tab there is certificates. So that's the certificates I can use. Going back to my dashboard, the certificates are used for interfacing from PowerShell and also Visual Studio tools. That's my site URL, which is a rather horrendous GUID, but this is the staging area. So what I've got up here, if I refresh this, it's a very simple program. You don't need to know the server name, all right, because this is remember, a web role running on a machine. I don't need to know that, but I'm actually just showing it. And it's in fault domain 1, update domain 1. If I just refresh that, so it's gone over on the load balancer, it just flipped between 1 and 0. If you look at I've got blob storage. I can actually upload into that blob storage. So I could choose a new blob. Well, I actually got blob 1 and 2 up there, so I'm putting file 1 up there. So that's now uploaded into blob storage. Tables, this is just purely written as a demo to demo tables and queues. I can put additional entries into the table, and I'm going to simply drop 20 messages into the queue. And remember, the queue is for communicating between front-end and back-end systems. So if we use Azure Storage Explorer, which I mentioned earlier, I can, in the same way that I connected using Cloud Explorer, I can connect up to a storage account, and here I can look at my blobs. So we can actually examine a blob, right, and I can upload and delete and so on. I can look at my queue, and my queue has already gone down to 12 messages. The reason being, the front ends, I've dropped 20 in at the front end, and now they're being consumed by the back end. And so if we refresh that a few times, what we'll see is it drops off as my worker processes at the back end consume from the queue. So eventually that queue will actually go down to nothing, so 9, 8. So it gives you an idea. But what I wanted to show is that we can connect to these things, we can look at what's going on, and there's my messages in the message table. So I've got a table called messages, and that just gives you an idea of that you can see the messages in there themselves. Now, if I want to, and I'm ready, what I can do is I can do a VIP swap. This takes a little bit of time because it has to be progressed correctly. But as it's doing the VIP swap, I don't actually lose access to the site. So I can go back to the site. So I'm going to get to one of my instances. So it's going to do the swap, but keep the instances running until finally the VIP swap is complete. And again, I couldn't possibly demonstrate this if I didn't cut some time out. So now I'm production, and there is my production URL. All right, so I've now moved over to with the production URL. So I figured it all out in staging, and then when I was ready, I did the VIP swap to take it over into the production space. Okay, so now this, easy. You can manage that. This is very interesting, where you actually map the requirements. So no wasted software, no wasted hardware, resources, and you are actually tracking requirement. And that is really becoming where you're really being agile and scaling. In terms of identity in the cloud, I've only got a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to mention that there is the ACS service, so it allows us to use identity from on-prem, from a partner organization, and it acts as a broker service, and it uses federation to tie all of this together. Say it spent the whole of Monday going through federation and SharePoint and getting all of that working. So, and the idea, in fact, the ACS service, which is now being rebadged as the Windows Azure Active Directory, is a broker. So what it will do is it will allow you to use Google Identity, or in fact, let's just do a quick 2-second demo, and I'll just show you. I have SharePoint. One of those virtual machines was actually SharePoint running in the cloud. So if I just very quickly switch over, I've actually got SharePoint running in the cloud. It's XTS-SP, okay, and it's actually got HTTP and HTTPS. With federation, you need HTTPS. I'm going to cancel that, just change that to, that was Windows authentication, by the way, coming up. I'm now going, and it's sent me through ACS, and I can federate with, I've federated with Google. So now I'm coming in with a Google ID. So I supply my Google ID, and so it's the.com. It's, yep. So put the Google ID in and sign in. And I'm now into SharePoint. So SharePoint is running in Azure. Authentication is running through the access control service. So I've actually got in and managed to federate the whole thing. So in terms of, I've got a couple of slides on diagnostics and monitoring, which I'm not going to have time to do, but they're in there for reference. Just to finish off, just to say what's changed, not a lot. We don't have to install the server hardware anymore, but we're going to have to manage our networking for cloud and on-premise. We're going to not install the operating system, although you can if you like. So that's why it's a dotted line. Okay? Update, update, update. You can if you like. You will do if you deploy virtual machines. But if you're using web roles, worker roles, that's all taken care of for you. Manage storage and backup? Absolutely. Apply security? Absolutely. So it's really new ways of supporting your enterprise and new opportunities, and that's the key. You will also have to think about managing images and deploying images. So that's another piece of work you're going to have to look at. But what it will really give you is it gives you the chance of actually bringing scalability and agility to your company, absolutely matching IT to what the business wants. And that's where I think the whole space is actually looking very exciting. So that was a very whistle-top tour of trying to get through the whole of Azure in an hour and 15, and we're over by 1 minute, but I hope you'll forgive me that. And thank you very much for coming to the session, and please don't forget to, there's a slide, so if you need any consultancy, there you are, plug. And what's, again, very important, if you could submit evals, and also what's very useful to me is anything written down I can actually make sense of. You know, it's much easier for me, rather than the scores on the doors, great, please do those, they're essential, but what's really useful is any written feedback that you can give, and I can see how I can improve the session or change it or whatever. Thank you very much, and enjoy the evening. And if you've got any questions, by all means come down. So I'm in no great rush to rush off.